Hey, hello, hi. How's it going? Shit, it's almost the weekend. You're listening to AJ of the Mighty Glue Stick. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining me once again. This is going to be another one of my rambly videos, and I've been prompted because there's been some interest in it of late on the One Shot group, and somebody asking me about it. Fantasy Age. How's my Fantasy Age campaign going? My home game. And the answer is short and simple. It's going amazeballs, really good. One of the best I've ever run, I would say. I'm certainly enjoying it. And I like to think that the players are enjoying it a lot because they show up every week. So, to recap, we've got a bunch of characters, 3, who have adventured from level 1 from a place called Great Rock Castle. And this is a homebrew world, a homebrew setting, which is sort of set 15th to 16th century, black powder, Three Musketeers sort of vibe to it, around the human settlements at least. The races are D&D stock races, but they have different cultures, and there's some things about this world which are remarkably different, but they have a familiar sort of origin. Like, I reasoned it out, all these different aspects. So one of the first things that the players noticed in this game was that they have access to guns, which has been no problem at all. There's been absolutely no issue with having guns in the game. In fact, the reloading time of guns is quite often a detriment to them being used more than the first round or so of combat. And after that, everybody generally just closes in or relies on spells or whatever. So the characters are Ish, who is a orc, not a half orc. He's a full-blooded orc. The orc in this particular setting are the people of the land. They are the first settlers of this particular area, extended sort of area, and this area that they're in is considered to be a relatively recent frontier for the major civilizations of this world. So dwarves are just still expanding into the area. Elves have arrived a few hundred years ago, and the humans have been here a few hundred years as well. And there's been lots of storied events of explorers and settlers and things like that, but generally speaking, there's no ancient civilizations here. So if you dig down deep, you're gonna come across non-human or non-elven or non-dwarven ruins and remains, and more likely than not, you'll come across ancient orcish artifacts than any other race in this particular area. So that's an interesting aspect. Halflings are present, but yeah, we did an interesting thing in this game where we had a chance to go away from the D&D stereotypes. So halflings are not hobbits of the Shire. They're more like, we have a lot of Cantonese-speaking Chinese people in New Zealand, and particularly in my city, there's quite a few Cantonese-speaking people. So when we're talking in the voices of the halflings, we speak with a Cantonese accent. So it's like Cantonese accented common. So when you're talking with a halfling, they'd be talking like, I can't really, it's hard to do when you're not in game. But they basically talk like, with that Cantonese Mandarin, Cantonese Chinese sort of accent. And the halflings in this game are not the nice guys. They're not good guys, generally speaking. They have unsavory appetites. And I take this from the renowned appetite or propensity for eating that halflings have in D&D, and I've given it a dark aspect to it. So you have cannibal cults of halflings, and halflings. One of the first things that the player group came across was a inn that was frequented and run by a halfling and frequented by lots of travellers. That was a couple of days' journey out of Great Rock Castle, called the Towering Inn, which is an old watchtower that's got sort of abandoned as indefensible. And the innkeeper cooked kenku, so captured, imprisoned and murdered and cooked kenku, and people sort of went along with it and ate kenku, and everyone's at the we were like, dude, really? Like kenku? I'm like, yeah. So intelligent species in this world are relatively common. including non-human and very non-human intelligent species. And they don't have the same sort of reverence for intelligent species that we would assume that they do. And so Kenku, although an intelligent people, they're not quite as intelligent, or not intelligent in the same way as humans or elves, and they're seen as second-class sort of intelligent beings, and are not attributed the same rights and privileges as other intelligent beings. So, and the halflings take advantage of this by basically hunting these trusting, or kind of quaint Kinku, and trapping them and doing horrible things. And they know that the Kinku have very close clan and family ties, and so if they capture a matriarch of the family or something like that, then it's relatively easy to capture the entire flock. And this is exactly the case that happened with this towering inn. They needed to rescue the matriarch and return the eggs to the tribe. And as a consequence, the player characters have become friends of the Kinku. So we've got Ish, who's an orc. And the orcs in this game are modelled after the local sort of Maori people of New Zealand. So they speak with a sort of guttural accent, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard a Maori accent before, but that's kind of what they sound like. And we do it very well because we know that culture very well. And it's a lot of fun to immerse ourselves as emulating that culture, but we can take a leave from it, so it's not disrespectful because we're portraying it in a fantasy way. So we pick and choose the things that we like the most about it, like the martial traditions and the family obligations and the way that the social standings work. So the mana, or the social awareness, or the civic importance that somebody builds up through reputation. And Ish is relatively well known, this character. He's a butcher by trade, and he travels around the communities doing home kills. So he goes to farmers, goes to various farms, and they pay him to kill and butcher their livestock. And as a consequence, he's well known, and he's also very strong and very good with knives, which he uses to great effect later on. Ish in the game has acquired a magical artifact, but I'll get to that in a minute. So we started out, they went to the Taringan, and the basic drive of this entire plot is the promotion of, well, one of the players is playing a dwarf, and he's basically being promoted from an apprentice to a sort of adept as a mage. As a scholar and a learned user of spells, arcane spells, particularly fate spells. And it became known to him and to the other apprentice, who had been apprentice for much longer than he had, that the master basically wasn't going to progress the other apprentice any further. And as a consequence, this other apprentice, true to his nature and the reason why he wasn't being promoted any further, reacted violently and duplicitously and murderously, and ended up attacking and killing the master of these two students. He then ransacked and took everything of worth, including forbidden textbooks, from his master's study, and the player character basically decided to give chase and bring him to justice, or at least hunt him down and kill him in revenge for the death of his master, who he liked very dearly. And also the human king of Great Rock Castle basically bid him go and do this, put it in his care. So they were kind of deputized, and also told, if you bring back any heads of bandits and things, we'll pay you for it. But yeah, and this whole area that they're in has come out of a period of basically warfare, feudal warfare between various city-states. And it's only become peaceful relatively recently, like within the last couple of decades or so. It's calmed down, and there's not the prospect of immediate war and sieges and things like that happening all the time. And it's left the men-at-arms of the region, who previously had a pretty much guaranteed career in warfare, at a loss as to what to do. So a lot of them went to farming and things. And also a great group of them went off to the east for rumours of trouble brewing in the east, always to the east. And a lot of nobles who had family obligations to look after property and bound families and tenants, basically, who lived on their land, were kind of frustrated. And there's one in particular, Dracon, which they meet later. Also in this player character group is a human who fancied himself a bit of a knight, where he's actually more of a rogue. He's a trader's son, and is very adept at business and guile and sleeping with women, and that's kind of how he's gotten through life. But he has sort of illusions. Well, he's got delusions of grandeur. He's got ambition to be a famous hero. And he's setting about trying to do it, and he's managing quite well. He's already been knighted in the game, so he is known as Sir blah blah, and he likes the color green, so he's Sir blah blah the green. Anyway, so these guys set off after the apprentice guy, and in the process of doing so, they get they meet up with a priest in the local town, which is like just the first sort of outlying town that most of the farmers and peasant folk do most of their business at if they don't want to travel into the city proper, into the castle. And that little town's called Easton, or Easttown. And further up the road, past some forest, they come to the Towering Inn. And then further on from that, skirting along the edge, if you imagine they're sort of moving through a glacial valley with forest on one side and mountain slopes going up to actual mountain peaks on the other, and there's a forest which butts up against that sort of mountain range, and in that forest is a monastery, an ancient monastery, and that becomes a focus of the campaign at first. So they kind of put the pursuit of the apprentice on hold for a little bit after a series of events. First of all, they're heading on the open road, and they get involved in a rather tremendous thunderstorm. And lightning shoots down and kills one of the horses, causing the horses to bolt. They run off up into the hills, and they accidentally discover an old ruin that they haven't identified. It turns out that it's an ancient elven burial ground thing, and this was one of the first big conflicts that they had, a big scrap with a bunch of bugbears who came looking for their horses, and the bugbears snuck up and engaged in combat with these guys, and they were pretty much holding their own. And then there was some kobolds as well. Yeah, I believe so. Yes. So the bugbears got distracted, went and ransacked the kobolds, killed off a bunch of kobolds, took all their stuff. Yeah. So in the background, there is stuff happening in the wilderness where civilizations that are not part of human or dwarven or elven kind are going about their business, and the bugbears and kobolds and other races have civilizations of their own that are on the outskirts. And so every time these guys go out into the wilderness, they're discovering that there's life beyond the walls of the castle that they're not privy to. So they come across interactions between these different species, and over time they'll piece it together and figure out how these different species interact. But as it is, as characters and as players, they've got no real knowledge of this world. So it's very interesting. Particularly because they know that I'm quite sort of freewheeling, and I'll make up stuff on the fly, but always with this background cohesive image of what the world is like. Anyway, so they get into conflict with the bugbears. They manage to persevere, and then one of the bugbears gets taken by a manticore, and it's sheer fluke chance on the dice roll that the manticore was closer to the bugbear and took that victim and not one of the player characters instead, because that would have been a very deadly combat indeed. Anyway, so they're now aware that there is a manticore in the area. Also that this manticore is carrying off food, which may mean that it's a mated pair of manticore, perhaps. We don't know. They also go and investigate the kobolds, or what's left of them. And then they seek shelter and discover that there's an opening. And down in this crypt, there's a sort of a almost like a lounge room with it's like a traveler's rest before you get into the crypt itself. And it's got a fireplace, and it's obviously a site of cultish activity by these nasty halfling cannibal cult. And they detect that there is a spirit, a supernatural presence that is there, and it's a cannibal spirit of the halflings, and a particularly unsavory thing it is, but luckily very cowardly and weak, but just scary as balls. And the players do not want to stay there alone at night, sort of thing. So they go investigating further, and knowing full well that I'm not going to hand them any magic items. And magic items are not going to be drops from enemies. They are going to have to risk and explore in order to obtain this great wealth. And that's exactly what they proceed to do. They go looking further and deeper, and lo and behold, they discover a chamber that has not been disturbed, in the form of a sort of a hollowed out natural cavern, which is underneath this elven edifice. And over time, the crypts of the elven nobles have fallen through the floor, sort of rotted through the limestone. And one of the coffins has broken open, and they take some items from that, and they make their way out of there. So they've got some stuff. But by far the more interesting discovery they made is when they broke open a stairwell which is going down, and it seemed to be even older still. A spiral stair that went down into a chamber where they encountered a white ooze which was sticking to the limestone in perfect camouflage that also concealed the door to another chamber. And they disturbed a golem in the form of a statue that was between two other statues, that in the core of those statues were golden representations of ancient heroes. And one of them was carrying a sword, and the other one was carrying a sickle. The orcs, they had some orc retainers with them at the time called Toadloak, Rangi, and Poe, who one of them grabbed one of the sickle, and he essentially, it was the halfling item, and it was geared to attune itself perfectly to a halfling, and communicate sort of nervous system to nervous system with a halfling. And what happened when the orc picked it up is that his heart kind of went wonky because it was trying to beat at the same rate and speed as a halfling heart, and it killed him. He died of a heart attack. Which was a tremendous shock to the players that, wow, if you pick up a magic item and you're not attuned to it, it can kill you. I'm like, yeah, they're serious business. But not all magic items like that. They're all going to be slightly different. And sure enough, the orc-ish picked up the sword that was being carried by the representation of a half-orc, by a representation of an orcish folk hero female who was famous in the area from many, many years ago. And it was attuned to him, and he discovered that he had quite a potent weapon that would ignore damage reduction. I suppose I should talk about the actual gameplay of Fantasy Age instead of just talking completely about the plot of the story. Okay, so in a nutshell, what you essentially do is you roll 3 six-sided dice for every check, and it's a combination of either straight against your ability scores, or your ability score is modified by having a focus in a particular skill. Usually ability scores have so generally speaking, what you're adding a number and you're trying to beat a target DC. So at the level that these characters are, the DCs are around say 12 or 13 is fairly difficult for a first level character. Now they're getting into the 15 to 18 level range as they do more and more heroic stuff as they get higher in level. But for the most part, it's a very streamlined and easy way of doing everything. So you do that for attacks against defense scores. Your dexterity and whatever arm you're wearing and things give you a defensive score that you have to roll over to hit them. And then the armor itself takes off armor points value off the damage inflicted. So you basically, it absorbs damage. So if you're wearing particularly good armor, you got damage reduction for every incoming attack, which makes the combat both quite realistic and also very hard at some points, where it's very hard to get the players down because the characters have got a lot of damage reduction, and they're using their abilities very well. And it's a game that lends itself to very quick conflict. In my understanding of how you run games and things, this one's a pretty fast-paced system. The one sticking point that some people have is the stunt point system, and that is, of those 3 dice that you roll, one of them is an odd-colored dice called a stunt die, and every time you make a successful check that involves double numbers being rolled on those 3 dice, say you roll a 5, 5, and a 4, and the 4 is the odd-colored dice. It could easily be the 5 as well. You then have 4 or 5 stunt points that you can spend on that particular maneuver, and only on that one, and you basically use them immediately. You can't save them up, but you can use them on multiple things that happen simultaneously as you've spent all these points. So say you're doing an attack, you've earned 4 stunt points. You use 2 of them to get through the target's defenses without any sort of damage reduction, and the other one could be knocking them, other 2 points could be knocking them prone. So that represents that you've scored a particularly good blow. You've ducked in underneath their arm, gotten in underneath their armor, given them quite a telling blow, and then knocked straight off their feet, and they're now prone. So that represents basically criticals, and it's particularly cool. And once you've learned what the point cost of things are and what you do more often, it becomes very streamlined, because you basically learn these through play very organically. So there's a few that we all know and use by default, and there's a few that we have to sort of pick up our A4 cheat sheet, check the table. It's like 3 points for aid the enemy or something like that, and then we can do them. There's only a set number of stunt points. Stunts that you can do, but they cover basically everything that you'd need them to do. Also, you have spell stunt points and exploration stunt points, and exploration stunt points are sort of plot-based things. So say you're doing a navigation roll and you roll some stunt points, you say, I'm going to spend those on some extra additional effect. What I usually do, though, is I sort of narrate one of the things on the table and say that's what happens. Because otherwise it sort of bogs down it takes away your agency as a DM. So combat stunt points and spell-based stunt points are all the player's choice, whereas the exploration stunt points, quite often it's just me going, okay, this happens. So that's basically that in a nutshell. That's most of the gameplay in a nutshell, is just rolling against a DC or a defensive score or whatever. Other than that, it's hit points and spell points and things like that. Spells are very easy to do, and all of the magic works exactly the same, whether it's divine or arcane or whatever. That is why you basically have 3 character classes, which is the fighter, which is Ish. You've got the mage or cleric or druid or whatever, and then you've got the rogue or scholar or thug type character. And the players are all playing different aspects of those core classes, but of course the variability available to you in under those 3 core classes is enormous. Added to that, you've got all the different races that you can play as well, and it's very easy to make up new stuff on the fly. Somebody asked me, there's only a limited number of monsters that you can use in the book, the Fantasy Age book. So what do I use? Well, I use a supplement, if I can find it. I've put it somewhere. Where? That is the question. I've got so much paperwork. All those little buzzes that you hear in the background is social media going through my tablet. In case you wondered, I get constantly pestered. And I love it, normally. Okay. Yeah. I've got to find things. Luckily, I have a folder for my Fantasy Age campaign, which I recommend to everybody. There it is. It's the Mystara Fantasy Age version 1.e. Book of Monsters, Bestiary, and it's got everything you need. And if you haven't found specifically what you're looking for in there, there will be some listing which is very close to what you want. And the thing I like about the Mystara supplement, as opposed to the monsters that are listed in the actual book, the monsters in the book for Fantasy Age are examples. And it looks like it's like they're giving you an example of something that you can modify to your heart's content to give you a sort of a broad idea of like what a manticore is or something like that. The ones in the Mystara are very much, this is a monster listing that you can use. So it's got a better at-a-glance arrangement of all of the data on the monster, including, so you'll have its name, its defensive score, its armor rating, its immunities, its vulnerabilities, its health, its speed, the various senses, all of its ability bonuses like +4 constitution, +3 dexterity, etc. What it uses as an attack, its favored stunts. So if it earns stunt points, what it's most likely to use, such as knock prone or mighty blow. Its weapon groups and its special abilities and its special attacks. And it lists those for all of the different things. So it's very, very easy to run a monster just glancing at that table and grabbing the info. And I think if I was ever going to add Fantasy Age listings for any of the stuff that I come up with, that's certainly the format that I will follow, is the one that you find in Mystara. And yeah, they've got a good selection of stuff in there, for sure. All the basic D&D monster stuff, including the new ones like the Decapod and their variants of dragons and things. It's a good read. Also, because it's new and it's not strictly D&D, the players don't know what to expect. And with a player group that's been around with me for 10 years or so, like the current one is, that's valuable, very valuable, having stuff that they're not expecting. Yeah, so the game has progressed. They made their way through the crypt. Then they got involved in a side quest for. They encountered some gnolls and a pitched battle with some gnolls. Ish in particular fighting, I think it was 3 or 4 gnolls single-handedly, and managing to walk out of that alive, although largely eviscerated, but still alive, and he managed to make it. And that was indicative of there was some demonic activity from cultists happening in this monastery. And at one point they came out of the towering inn and it was raining flies in one of the most visceral, upsetting scenes of signs of something's not right that I think I've ever introduced into the game, with very clear descriptions of exactly what it was like to walk across a ground full of twitching and writhing maggots and flies. I mean, just think about it. Thousands and thousands of flies pelting off you. It was disgusting. Anyway, and yeah, it was this general aura of the supernatural is seeping into the area, and demonic energies are particularly nasty. So they then assaulted the monastery, got into a fight with a bunch of dretches, which were coming out of, was it dretches? Lemures that were coming out of a portal that these cultists had opened. Put everyone to death, and then used a magical item that they'd found earlier to seal the breach. Then they used potent earth magic, old elven magic, to bring down the monastery, and a great oaken tree grew over top of it, and at the heart of this oaken tree was this artifact pin, which was holding a breach in reality closed, and the elves who were on hand at the time, sort of lending assistance, made it very clear to everyone that no one should talk of the tree, no one should talk about the monastery, everyone should just shut up, don't tell anybody about this, and most certainly let it be known that if anybody does find this tree, it should never ever be harmed, because it's the only thing holding this breach in reality closed. Yeah, so that was that, and then they proceeded to carry on. They sent a lot of their wealth that they'd acquired back home to Great Rock Castle, and then they carried on looking for this apprentice. And at current well, currently they've gone out into the wilderness. They've killed the mated pair of manticores. They've gotten to know an elven guy named Silverleaf, who's very standoffish to the human character, but sort of more on friendly terms with the dwarf because he trusts what the dwarf has to say, and that's mainly just a personal interaction with the two. They met Sir Draken, and the complication that the human character has slept with both of his daughters, which has not come to light yet. But Lord Draken will most likely try and kill him if he finds out the truth. And they've gone off onto the wilderness. They've gone through some pretty rough terrain, headed towards an inland river because they've decided that it will be faster to go by river and then by sea to reach the end destination of the apprentice, which they discovered, than it would be to go across land through Orcish lands. Even though it's relatively safe farmlands, it's still a very long way by foot or by horse. And they came across a logging community where they built ships that plied this river. They booked passage, took off on the ship with its rather surly and annoying gnome captain. And then they came across a dam, and the dam it turns out the dam had been built by a giant, and the giant then threw a massive boulder, smashed the ship in half. Everybody ran sort of screaming into the wilderness. The giant headed off after one of the characters convinced him that there was other giants in the area or some such. And then they trekked along the river in a little canoe that they'd built themselves, and then they camped for the night after encountering a rope bridge, which they cut through, pouring a bunch of very nasty-looking kobolds into the water along with a cart full of boxes of gems and things that they've been transporting. They made their way down the river a little bit more, put up for the night, and in the morning, first thing that happened is they looked across the river and there was another big giant, different giant this time, and amongst the players excitedly talking amongst themselves about this turn of events, the giant noticed that they were there, immediately threw a boulder, smashed their smaller ship, pummeled them. They then pelted off into the forest at top speed to get away from this thing, and accidentally discovered a house built in a log that was owned by some gnomes. And one thing led to another, and they had a very awkward sort of morning tea with this gnome family that had never really seen a human or a dwarf or these big races. And it turns out that this was just one house which was attached to a thoroughfare which attached to a gnome city underneath this forest that nobody had ever known was there. And it was amazing describing this gnome city to these guys with the cobblestones. Each one of the cobblestones has got a small anecdote about one of the members of the community etched into it like a Hollywood Walk of Fame. All of the shop sides are made from interlocking hexagons of different types of wood, and it's like a Santa's workshop, but on a citywide scale, and all in tiny size with all these fascinating little characters running around. So it's a great location. And it became clear that the gnomes, once they were aware that the kobolds had the possibility of having gems, that they would do basically anything to get those gems. And to get in really good with the gnomes and to secure transport via Griffin, all they had to do was to go and get a bunch of gems off those kobolds and bring them back and pay for their passage via Griffin. So this is an offer too good to refuse. So they set off and set out to ambush these kobolds who had just finished grabbing the gems which had sunk to the bottom of the river, and were fairly exhausted on the riverbank and gathered around their one single cart. And the players noticed that all of these kobolds looked acid-scarred, haggard, very, very vicious, daubed with black ink all over their skin, with white markings on their faces that looked like skulls, because these kobolds were the thralls of a black dragon, and their life was nothing but misery, and they loved to inflict that misery on everyone around them. which became very clear as soon as the player characters launched into frontal assault on these things, and the kobolds swarmed in fanatical fury. So you got 3, I think level 4 or 5 player characters against 15 vicious, fanatical, suicide killer kobolds, including a shaman who I think was one of the first ones to go down. And this battle was very close, to the point where I was pretty sure about halfway through that it was going to be a TPK, because the players were not doing well. They did fight very smart though, and they were taking down one target at a time. But at one point, the human rogue was in dire straits. He had 5 kobolds on him, and they were attacking with pack tactics basically, and pooling their dice rolls and stuff. And it was serious shit. And if it wasn't for the mage, the dwarven mage, using Hands of Fate to manipulate dice rolls, or forcing me to re-roll dice rolls, they all would have died for sure. And also, halfway through this fight, thinking that, well, he noticed that there was a shape in the river, so one of these, the human rogue threw a bunch of gems into the water, and this bloody decapod came out, and they were like, they thought that was just absolutely awful. I showed them a picture of this tree-hugging octopus thing, and they all basically went, well, great shit, that's it, we've spawned the second mob of monsters, we're going down, we're going to die, etc, etc. But they're all edge of their seat, and we're already past time for the game, but we decided to push on until it was done. And somewhere towards the middle of the fight, I think, there was a hail of arrows from the treetops as the Kenku, who had tracked these guys for quite some distance, decided to lend a hand, but they were mostly firing at the decapod to keep it off them, and only a few arrows were going into the kobolds themselves, so they didn't seem very effective. But once the battle with the decapod had sort of turned away, because it decided it just wasn't worth it getting any food for this many arrows, went back to the river. They polished off the last of the kobolds, and then the Kenku came down and introduced themselves. And yeah, they took quite a few gems, those Kenku, and thanks for their services, but not all of them, which they probably could have. And that's kind of where we left it off, where the characters are about to go back to the gnomes and pay for their passage. Of course, they're only going to reveal some of the gems to the gnomes, because the gnomes basically have no control over themselves when it comes to the gems, and you'd be rightfully fearful, even of these good aligned gnomes, when they're around basically their glowy rock crack, which is the Starstones. Starstones. Yeah. So far, so good. All of the players are absolutely in love with the system. I must say I'm very happy with it as well. I use supplementary tables from other books for weather patterns and wind direction and all that sort of stuff. But as it is, the game is perfectly workable, very adaptable, and I would thoroughly recommend it to anybody who likes a nice freeform game where the special stuff you can do in those stunt points, charts and things is very clearly laid out. And other than that, you can be pretty loose around the edges with this rule system. It's very robust. The magic system is good. You have to roll a difficulty thing to get the spell off. You have points that you track for magic use. And yeah, everything's pretty good. Even the healing is fairly realistic. So I definitely recommend it for sure. If you've got any questions about this campaign, I guess if I think of anything else, I'll let you know. And thanks for listening to me ramble on about my home game. Hope that gives you maybe some inspiration. I don't know. Yeah. Thanks for listening. I'll be back probably later again this weekend, although I do have a lot of online games that I'm going to be running or participating in. But I'll try and get another monster video off if I can. No promises, but I'll try.